Roanne O'Donnell from St Andrews, Scotland is an award-winning Scottish painter currently working on the series of painting and frottage surface work. He studied drawing and painting at the prestigious Edinburgh College of Art and went on to obtain a Master's in Contemporary European Fine Art. After 18 years of professional practice in Northern Norway, she now has her studios in Andalucia and Fife, Scotland. O'Donnell makes paintings, drawings and frottage with a subtle minimalistic approach, the subject being the process of making it, inextricably linked to the concepts and actions of limitation, restriction and repetition. The work is systematic and meticulously planned works that resonate with services created by means of rules and omissions, acceptance and refusal. Her works are notable for their perfect finish and tactile nature. This is of great importance and bears witness to her concerns of craftsmanship. Her work has been exhibited worldwide and collected by such as the Scottish Office, Northern Norwegian Museum of Art and private collectors. Recent exhibitions include FAB2020 Contemporary Art Festival with Outside the Form and Giornata del Contemporaneo. In 2021, she will work in Venice with a.topos Contemporary, and in-depth interviews can be read in contemporary art magazines, Art Habens Review, Reset Fine Art and Art Reveal magazine. Parallel with her own practice, O'Donnell is a curator and the director of the Gallery of Northern Norway, collaborating with the National Museum of Art in Oslo, curating exhibiting work by Paul McCarthy, Norway 10 designers and established international and emerging artists. And with that, I would like to pass you on to tonight's artist.
Hi there, thank you Bethan for that fabulous introduction. I think I don't need to say any more now, do I? You've done the whole artist talk for me. What I'd like to do today is just, or this evening, is just to, apart from introduce myself and my work and my art practice, is to take you back to the very beginning, because I've been an artist, a professional artist since 1990. I know you're shocked. You're shocked I don't look that old. I'm sure that some of you weren't even born then, but that's the way it is. So I'm long in the tooth. I'd like to share my screen with you. Prepared some things on my website. It's the best way for me to communicate what I'm doing, because all the information is there for you. All the images that I think are pertinent to my practice now are there. So let's just do that, and hopefully we're all there. Can you all see my website? Yeah, hope so. Great. So I'm just going to read this, if I may, because it's very succinct, and it sums up basically in very simple terms what I do. So as Bethan, you said, I'm a painter working in Scotland and Spain after 18 years of being in Northern Norway. And I have my studios in Scotland and a small town called Montyhackie in Northern Andalusia. I'm a process painter. That's very important, very, very important. I say that in big letters. The thing is, basically, the process of making the work is the theme of the work. And in essence, it can be very simple action, very simple practice that can reduce me personally working as an artist down to the essence of it. But as we know, simple movement or a simple instruction can be quite complex, and so I hope tonight I might be able to explore that with you. I'm going to read. The subject of my work is the process of making it. With limitation, restriction and repetition, an exact set of materials and a constrained mark-making action, I've deliberately controlled its painfully slow development and direction. It's a 22-year investigation. The mark is a horizontal line, has always been. The substrate is paper, although I have worked on linen. The carriers and binders are limited to oil and cold wax. Pigments are restricted to ivory black, charcoal and graphite. The physical process is the repetitive action of mark making. I bend over my paper laid flat on a surface, and by moving my paint mixtures, I create a line over and over, again and again. The concept behind it is a question of gemination, and I quote, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. And the perception is, for me now, after many, many years, is the impossibility of duplication, and that is what drives me. So that's basically the essence of what I do. I thought I would go on and show you, first of all, my work as it is today. Very quickly run through that. Thank you. There we go. As you can see, as I hope you can see, all this work is from, it's called Surface Work, New Work. This was all done in 2020, 2021. Each image is created in the same way, using the same materials, the same movement, the same action, but so many factors determine the outcome that even though I'm mark making in the same way with the same repetitive action and these limited materials, as you see, each piece has its own identity, and rather like us as human beings, we all, most of us are blessed with features, limbs, and yet we can recognize, you know, subtle intricacies of each other, the differences between each other very easily. And that's how I look at my own work. Each time I make a line, I register its life, its right to exist, corresponding with the other lines that I'm making, and a very, very quick observation and determination means that I'll either keep it or I'll move it and change it. I never eradicate, don't ever scrape off, I just move and scrape into a different form. Years ago, when I was at college, I was a student at Edinburgh Art College, and we used to get thrown out of the college to go in and to go out and draw around Edinburgh. And I was drawing around Edinburgh. It was a freezing cold winter's day. I was tired, cold, and I looked up. I was at Edinburgh Castle, and I looked up and I saw the Church of St. John, and I was struck by the monumental sculptures that were a part of this facade. And I thought, my God, here I am, freezing my arse off, sorry, and people dedicated their whole lives, generations dedicated their whole lives to creating this, and I don't even have the patience or the staying power to draw it. And what developed there was an absolute awe for manual labour and stone. So those two things combined led me on a path where I would go around and I'd study elements of Edinburgh architecture. Started off in the Gothic and then went into the New Town. And I was drawing facades, painting facades. And then as years went on, I grew closer and closer and closer to the actual facade. So I was capturing small pieces of architecture, of stone or of brick. But what was happening was, although I felt they were truly representative, they were being read as abstract. So for me, it was a question of, I was quite curious, I was quite set in my ways. My education had been very traditional at Edinburgh College of Art. It was modelled after the academy in Paris. We weren't allowed to use oil paints until our third year. We were drawing head life, still life, croquis, all, you know, until we got skills under our belt, and then we were able to just expand on that and go into, some people went into abstraction, but it was very rare, mostly figurative. So for me, my work was still figurative. And I didn't argue with anyone because I knew that their perception of my work was their business. What I'd done was I created it, and I gave it over to the viewer, and how they interpret it was up to them. Though for me, I was sticking to my guns. Then in 1997, I decided to go to do a master's in contemporary European fine art with Winchester School of Art. And unbeknownst to me, the course started in Barcelona. And I'd only thought, I'm going to go and do that. So it was about a month before they started the course, and I knew I was a late applicant, but they accepted me. And then they said, start date 28th September, Barcelona. I thought, oh, right, better get sorted then. It was the best thing I did. They immediately confronted me on the fact that I was doing lines or architecture figuratively, producing work that to me was representative when they couldn't see it. And so they were very blunt and very direct. It was almost like prove to us. But what I realized was that I was having to prove to myself, this is work that's really pushing the boundary of what my own acceptance of what it is. So it was a great time. Barcelona was fantastic. I've never worked so hard. Oh, no, that's not true. I work very hard now. I'm a very hard working artist. I call it the best year and the worst year of my life, because it was such a confrontational period in my work, but also very rewarding, because then I was able to go through so much investigation to find out, where I was. I'll just take you into this exhibition. This was an exhibition in Norway after I'd completed my master's. Very, very difficult to see the surfaces of these paintings, but they are lines. And I was making very large pieces of work on linen and monumental. And all the time I was reflecting on where the figurative aspect stopped, where the process and abstracted elements started, and what was still the impetus or still the pivotal part of my creative process. And it was going back to my past, going back to the awe for manual labour. I had to really investigate, why was I holding on to something that didn't appear to be relevant in my practice anymore. But I think it was getting to the very root of the issue that was really important for me. So after leaving Barcelona, I went to live in the north of Norway, and I was very lucky. For the first 3 years, I was a practicing artist. North Norwegians are fantastic people. There's a very strong network of artists working up there, and they're very supportive. I'm just going to go quickly over to 2004, because I had a hiatus in my praxis, which was that while I was a professional artist, I was looking for a studio, and I discovered this building, and it was an old military gym hall from 1890. And I thought, my God, it's fantastic. It'll be perfect for my studio, but I hope you can see the scale of it was enormous. So the building itself you couldn't build in it. It was grade 1 listed. So the only thing that I could do was to build a construction inside it. And I did that with the help of an architect and fantastic people and fantastic support. We created 10 offices and studios for creative practitioners. Oh, there's me, moving on. And it was a fantastic place for artists to get together. They rented studios and workshops, and there was a wonderful thing called synergy that develops through generosity when people in a similar creative industries are getting together, discussing. I mean, you know all about this. This is what you're doing. And the benefits are wider network, collaborations, exciting things happen. And that's what I was doing. So for a good period of time, I wasn't working. Then in 2012, I became the director, because I was very much in the art world in Norway, I became the director of Gallery North Norway. And I'm just showing you there's a great list of exhibitions that I curated, which was phenomenal. But by the end of 2016, I was quite upset with myself, because although I was always involved in creativity and creative industries, and I built a business and I was doing, you know, what I considered to be a really privileged and important job, I was missing being an artist. And eventually I stopped calling myself an artist, even though parallel I was always working. I've always had a studio, but I don't know if any of you have experienced that. You know, you're trying to make a living, you're trying to contribute to the art world, and suddenly you see that you're moving away from your own work and your own practice. So in 2016, I decided I'm going to move to Spain. I had a little house there, and from 2016 until now, I've just been focused on the art. And as you all know, it's hard work, but we do anything else. So with that said, I want to come back now to where I am and to the first exhibition that I had when I started working again with my work. And it was in a town called Montyhackie. That's where I live. There was an old cinema that had been, I don't know if you can see there, it's turned into a cement, what would you call it, fabric, place where they store materials for construction and building. And they thought I was crazy that I wanted to use this site. But they gave the site over to me, and I installed the first exhibition I had after coming back to my own practice. It was a point for me where I thought, if I'm going to start now with no interruption to the focus, then I want to be able to look back and ask that question again. How important is the initial impetus, the often manual labour? And it comes back to the fact that my family generations ago were from Ireland, who came to Scotland to be coal miners, and they worked in a small area of Fife, a small cluster of villages in Fife, and they worked in the deepest coal mine in Scotland, 600 metres below ground. They worked to give their children and their grandchildren a better life. And when I say that, I always get choked, although, as I say in my statement, I try not to be sentimental about it. But it is one of the reasons that I'm able to do what I'm doing, because they worked to give their children more opportunities, and the world has just expanded, and that's how it is. So with that in mind, I created work, and the pedestals have small stories about the people in my family, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, little memories of how I remember them and what they did. And it was so important to me. But I was in a bit of a quandary, not a quandary, but there was a dilemma. How do I do this and present this without it becoming the reason for the show, or the reason for the exhibition, or the reason for the work? And I came to the point that it can only be a gift. I didn't move away from my practice or my process, but when I was doing it, they are always in my thoughts, in my background. And so I wanted to give it to them as a gift so created it as a homage. And recently I'm seeing that where I'm looking in the art world, there are quite a few projects looking at memory. In Spain particularly, there's a project going on where a village is almost empty, because same as my grandparents, in the effort to give children a better life and more opportunities, that's exactly what they've done. The children have gone out into the world to experience and explore, and they're all moving out of the village, and the village now is full of old people, and the culture is disappearing. And it's that dichotomy, or the duality of making something available to someone, and then, you know, the end result being that you, I suppose, shot yourself in the foot in terms of culture and keeping hold of your tradition and your culture. So for me, it was a turning point, and it's the work that has really been the mainstay of all the work since. So I'm continuing the series. It's called Surface Work. This is me in my Scabby studio. Again, I hope you can see that the work is yeah, I'm not doing anything more more unusual than any artist does, exploring one issue. As this particular series is going on, then I'm becoming more and more specific about my palette, the way the palette is constructed. So I'm reducing my possibilities, I'm reducing, or I'm imposing more limitations. In that, with the recent body of work that I started in April, I have mixtures of ratios of graphite to wax and oil. 1 part of graphite to 10 parts mixture of oil and wax creates this very light surface, but making it in the same way, I went over then to 3 parts of graphite to 10 parts oil and wax. This one was made with 3 parts oil and 3 parts graphite, but what happened was that I mixed it with very little binder, so the surface was very dry. So the act of moving my paint across the surface, it's hacked, there's a lot of resistance, and it becomes a very dry material. It's not flowing, so the surface was giving me so much. It was such a different feeling, such a different impact. This is 4. I hope you can see that steadily the depth of the surface, the depth of the tone is becoming more intense. And then on to 7. So that, and now I'm creating, continuing with that. That's the latest piece of work. Does anybody like to ask me anything as I'm going on here? No? Oh, I see that. Okay, my pigments are limited. As I said, looking back at my initial impulse to respect building and manual labour, stone, carving, and combined with my own family, I didn't realise how important it was. It was always there. But the reason I limited my palette was to do with the mining. The miners in my family in this particular area of Fife, they had a tradition, it was a superstition, whereby they were in the coal mine, when they were brought up, we call it the pit. When they're brought up from the pit, there weren't any showers. They didn't get showers until the 60s. And the men would go home and either their wife or their children would bathe them. But the tradition was, or the superstition was, that they bathed their body, but they left an area of black coal dust on their spine, and instead of washing it away, they burnished it in with the Venus mount of their hand, this area. So they burnished it until it became tattooed. So after weeks, months, years of this, every miner in that village had what I call abstract paintings on their spine. To strengthen their spine was their belief. And it always makes me think of how beautiful that these men, when they were dressed in their Sunday best and clean and showered, they all had their own particular paintings on their backs, beautiful paintings on their backs. So that is an element that is there, the sentimental aspect of it. And I don't like sentimentality, but I can't help it. But the other reason is that when I'm working in such limited fashion, there are such tiny nuances that if I integrated colour, it would get confusing. So that limited grey-black palette allows me to explore, investigate, and read the work in a much simpler way without getting confused by the colour spectrum. The other thing I'll say, the process, the limitation. When I say in my artist statement that the perception I have is the impossibility of duplication, that is an absolute. And it is the drive, it's the reason I keep going. What happened to me was when I restricted myself to these self-imposed limitations, I actually thought that this broad, the possibilities were so broad, but as I continued to work, then it would get tighter and tighter and tighter. I actually believed I would get to a point where there was nothing more to investigate because I'd done it all. And what happened was I got to that point, and then an explosion happened with the realization of the impossibility of duplication, the realization I will never be able to reconstruct what I've already done. Every tiny line, every tiny movement has its own nuance, and is so exciting for me, incredibly exciting. And it helped me understand I do understand the concept of infinity now, whereas before I worked like this, it was quite hard for me. I think a lot of people struggle with the concept of infinity. But I accept it now. It is just in my brain, I accept it because I'd never be able to live. I live to infinity and still never make two lines the same. The other thing I can say, oh God, see, if you don't ask me questions, I'll just keep talking. The other thing is the materials that I use. I like to say that I use wax, cold wax. I make that myself with damar varnish and turps and beeswax. I will never make the same mixtures because damar varnish has small insects in it and little beetles and things, and it's either pure or not so pure depending on where it comes from and who's gathered it. The bees make, same principle of making a residue of their honey, and yet they all have their own mystical ways of doing it. I use charcoal, but dependent on which willow tree is carbonated, you either get a brown tone or a blue tone. So within the spectrum of my limitations, there are just so many nuances that it's mind-blowing for me. Also my movements. If I work on one layer at one time, if I stop, if someone shouts on me and I move my head up, that can break a pattern of movement that I can't get back again. And if I stop the movement, then what happens is I see the break. I see where it stopped and started. And so that's not acceptable to me. So then I have to just put that to the side and begin again. And so it's a continuity of flow. But even doing that, I can see where my movement has changed, or the rhythm of my movement has changed, how much pressure I put on it, how much speed there is. If I'm in a good mood, or there's something troubling me while I'm working, although it's not, I'm totally focused, these tiny little things all around you contribute to the mark that I'm making. And it's, again, that's something that drives me. I have as much control as I can muster, but there's always going to be things about my body that I'm not able to control. Things like the atmosphere. If I begin working in the rain, then my paper can buckle a little bit. By 6 o'clock at night, the sun came out, it's been out for 5 hours, the papers begin to shrink, and you have just a little bit of a different feel. The paint moves differently, if it's humid or it's dry. It's just incredible. So I do the same thing over and over, but never the same.
Would anyone like to raise their hand and ask a question? I don't know if anyone wants to actually ask a question in person. I think Carmela had her hand up before. There we go, yes.
Hi, Roanne.
Hi there.
I just wanted to ask, because your process is very laborious and it's like this repetition, what do you find yourself kind of thinking about or reflecting on as you kind of do it? Do you think about anything when you do it, or is all your attention in the doing?
As I said, I'm sure subconsciously there are thoughts. You carry your baggage, or your rucksack, as we say in Norwegian. You carry that with you. So there's a what's the word did I use there? Subliminal thing going on. But when I'm working, I'm totally focused on that action and that line, and to the point that in Spain a couple of years ago, I had to in the studio. I was in the top of it was a hotel, and I was in the top room. There was a door but no window, quite a large size, but it had a terracotta roof on it, and it was 40 degrees. And people would say to me, how can you work in that? And I thought, well, what's the problem? But it's so hot. I said, is it? And it's the same when it's cold. Just don't experience, I suppose I'm just so focused that external factors like that don't register. I might say, oh God, I'm bloody freezing, but you just crack on, don't you? No, I don't think about anything else. I don't think, well, maybe I do, I just can't remember. No, I don't think I do.
We've got a question from Tanya. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I saw that, Tanya. Can you ask me about what happens when I stop?
Yes, definitely. I'd love to know.
Yeah, when I stop, I know it's ruined. I just know I'm never going to get that tempo, that rhythm, the pressure back. And so it cuts the work. Sometimes I'll have to put it to the side. If it's a smaller piece of work, then I will work over it. But I know that I'm never going to, not never, I'd never say never, but so far I don't think I've ever been happy with a piece of work that has been stopped and started again. But I'll do it because every piece of work tells you something about the next piece of work or what you're trying to do. So then I'll convert it to almost like a sketch to learn more about the process. But there's nothing worse. If I stop and start and I think, oh, maybe being too close to it, I'm not standing. I don't mean physically standing back. I mean, I'm not looking at it. Maybe I need to look at it with fresh eyes. I don't have the opportunity to do that, so I just keep going. And if I pin it up and walk back from it, it's nails down a blackboard. It's that kind of, it's that feeling, and I know that that's it. It's given what it can give me, but it's never something that I'm going to be happy with.
Wow, that's brilliant. Thank you. I've just got one more question, if that's okay. I'm really curious about the kind of space that you're working in. Of course, you've got your studios and they look absolutely gorgeous, especially the one in Norway. And I'm curious about whether you would consider imposing limitations on the actual movement, whether it's restricting your space or because when as you've been speaking, it just I immediately thought of calligraphy and how meditative the practice is and how your movement and posture and that kind of thing really have a massive effect, and your breathing. And I'm just curious about whether you'd be open to that, you know, and whether you would explore that in the future. And yeah.
That's fascinating, Tanya. I'm going to do a set of work and I'm going to credit it to you. No, I haven't. I haven't thought of that, but I was offered a small space a couple of years ago, and I thought it wasn't big enough to do large work, and I thought, how can I do that? I could, because my work's on paper, I was thinking I could maybe roll it, you know, work on it and then roll it. But as you were talking there, I'm just actually constraining my body here to feel what would that be like? That would be really challenging. I'm going to have to try that out. I will try that out. No, seriously, I will.
Brilliant.
When people say, it's funny, I've used a body analogy for this point that I came to when I thought I was going to reach a point of boredom and saturation, then it just exploded. And the analogy I used, and I don't even think it's understandable, but I'll give it a try. If you're given a massive room to run around in and jump around in, then you've got this massive space to move your body in any way you want, fill your boots. How focused are you on your movements, on every aspect of your movements? I don't think you are, because you're experiencing this freedom. But if you're tied in a chair, tied to a chair and with tape, and you can't move anything, you cannot move your body, we've tied you in so strongly. The only thing you have that you can actually physically move is maybe your pinky. Then if you focus on that, how many movements, how many ways can you move your pinky? You're so focused on that it becomes much, much bigger than just a movement. It kind of is bigger than all the movements you can do in a huge room, because it becomes so much more important, and that's all you've got to figure. It's all you've got to think about. And that's how I feel about my work. I go closer, 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 so the tiny nuances become bigger. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Sure, if it makes sense to you, you're the first person that's ever made sense.
Thank you so much. That was the perfect answer. You've just given me like this spark, this boost that I needed. Thank you so much.
Good. I'm so happy about that. Yeah, maybe I need to wear a straitjacket. Yeah, seriously, I'm not kidding. That would be amazing. Really, what can you do? I maybe do it into a performance. That would be fantastic. Yeah. No, seriously, those two questions have really triggered something, an aspect that I've never thought about before. So if nothing else, even if people think this is a load of rubbish that I'm speaking, I've come away with something really quite important to think about.
We're getting quite a few questions in the chat actually, so I'll whiz through them for you. So this is from Andrea, and it says, you have studios in Spain and Scotland, but you also worked in Norway. Has your practice changed or been influenced by the place you were living in at that moment?
I don't think so, no. Again, I'm sure there's things in that are penetrating, maybe making some kind of effect or having some kind of effect. But my work when I go to work is so constrained that I don't feel it matters where I am. Yeah, I don't think so. But it might. Gosh, I'm going to write that down. It's another thing I've got to find out if it does or not. No, I think the continuity when I move and move around, I'm quite, what's the word? Oh, disciplined. Thank you. Yeah, I'm quite disciplined.
We've got a question from Laura, and it says, do you find that your work changes depending on how you are feeling that day? Do the lines vary depending on mood?
Yeah, I've thought about that as well. It must, because when I go in, I feel I'm doing the same movement, but there are changes in tempo and rhythm and pressure. And although I feel very much, like I said, Tanya, I feel very much that I'm in the zone and the external influences are not affecting me. We're human beings. There has to be a human factor. I do try to clock off. Going to work for me, I'm not dependent on inspiration. It's not like that. I'm going to do a process sometimes like a factory worker, going along a conveyor belt and doing the same thing. I wonder what these people think about, They've got to have, your attention's got to be there to be able to do your job properly, but in the same way, the creative process is repetitive. So after a while, maybe the mind does wander. I'm not conscious of that. I can't allow anything to interrupt me or hinder me or get in my way when I'm actually in the flow. But yeah, I'm sure mood you take your mood with you, don't you? Yeah. I'll call it, see, you've got so many ideas. I'm going to have a series called Angry Paintings, Calm Paintings. But all these, you're bringing up these factors, all these factors have got something to do with the output. So although, as I said, I'm repeating, like, what do you do? I draw and paint lines. It's so simple, and yet all these things contribute to it and becomes quite complex. Oh, that's interesting.
And Laura, oh, sorry about my dog there. Laura also asks, how many hours a day do you tend to work?
Oh, it depends. When I work in my studio, I've got a dry zone, a painting zone, and like a dry zone and admin zone. Some days I'm not painting, I'm at work, but I'm doing admin. And maybe looking at, where I can get an exhibition or, like we all do. We're secretaries, we're PR people, we all do these kind of things as part of the job and keeping abreast of things, doing a lot of reading and what have you. But normally just about, sometimes I start at 8, sometimes I don't start till 11, sometimes I finish at 2, 3, go and do something else, sometimes I'm there till 10 at night. This is the reason I love being an artist. When you're self-employed, you're flexible, and nobody's, as long as you meet your deadlines, then a normal working day, but varies more than a 9 to 5.
And Laura also says, this is just coming through, I'm interested in how something traumatic might affect your work, for example, grief. Do you think that would be something that could have a big impact on the final outcome?
That's quite a strange one. Grief, I haven't really experienced grief as I see other people experiencing grief. So it hasn't really affected my work. But I'm going to be very candid with you now. Like many creative people, there is a depressive element in my character, and I have been very ill. And when I was ill, my work, funnily enough, I couldn't continue. It wasn't physically possible, so I was sketching, and all my lines became diagonal, which was very bizarre. And it's not anything I would ever make. It's not a part of my work and my working process, but it feels like a subcategory of work, which is there. And the thing is that for me, I think my work's beautiful. I don't care what you think. I think my work's beautiful. But these diagonal drawings and sketches are absolutely beautiful, and they've got a delicacy about them. Even though some of them are very, very dark, they're just made with this super delicate touch. And I think that is as a result of not being well. It's like a fragility in myself was translated into a fragility of the sketches that I was doing. Very, very interesting question. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
We've got a message from Carmela in the chat, which says, it's really interesting that you view your work strictly as a process that's not consciously determined by other influences. I've not really heard this perspective from an artist before, and I completely agree with that. I think it's so interesting to get to hear from an artist who feels purely process-like. The only other artist I actually can think of really is Carmela herself, who does make a lot of work which is around processes, and I would highly recommend you all check her pieces out as well. Do we have a question also from Tanya? Oh.
Hi, I was just thinking about what you mentioned about your family moving from Ireland to Scotland to become coal miners, and I was just thinking about how land, the physical land, has traces of, you know, transformation and exploitation and, you know, everything. And I was curious about whether you view your work as a kind of retracing of this land that your parents, grandparents, that your ancestors kind of existed in, basically.
Tanya, I can quite easily sum that up in that it wasn't until years going through the process when I really, as I said earlier, started to reflect on where it all came from, that I began to appreciate your question, looking at the land and the effect of the land. So it wasn't the land that influenced my work. It was more my work made me aware of those kind of things, you know, the transition of people from one area to another, empty spaces that were once full, different cultures being, traditions and cultures being reduced because the younger people were moving away. And all of that has come to me as a result of doing what I'm doing and reflecting on the surface work and series of work. I've always been aware that I grew up with two parents who came from the same village, and my grandfather was the best man of my other grandfather, and my grandmothers were best friends from their childhood. And so I'm very privileged to have that very tight social dynamic. And I know all the stories are passed down, and it was so natural. So I've always been aware of it, but I haven't questioned it or looked into it fully until the past 3 or 4 years working with this series of work. And although it doesn't play, for me, it doesn't play a big influence, it has definitely made me aware and made me look further at it. So thanks for the question, that was really interesting.
Do we have any last questions from anyone? No? Okay, well, I have one last one before we go. A lot of our community is made up of art students and those who are starting their art journey. So do you have any advice for those people who are just starting out in the art world or getting into the art schools? Anything you could give them?
I've got two answers. Do you want the clean one or the dirty one?
Give us both.
Okay, hard work, consistency, self-motivation and discipline, very important. Really trying to practically be as professional as you can be. Professionalism is so important in contemporary. When I was a younger artist, you know, it was kind of, we were still in the kind of bohemian cliche art, you know, art student, art college thing. Things have changed now. I think art students are much more focused on their career, whereas, you know, I wasn't at that time. But being super professional, is really important. Commitment. When you're researching, when you want to maybe apply for an exhibition, research, make sure that your work fits. Don't just go out there and do anything. Make sure that your work fits so that you can be absolutely honest and truthful about your work in that context. In respect of the work, never deviate from being honest and never put your integrity in jeopardy, because it will show in the work. Absolutely. Don't try to do anything that doesn't feel right. Just experiment, of course, but when you feel it doesn't feel right, just go to what feels right. And just very quickly, as the director of the Gallery of Northern Norway, before I took over, they had a group of people doing the job. I took over, and after a couple of years, in a meeting, my colleague said to me, "Since you started, Roanne, we've had no problem with artists. We normally, there used to be problems. They were demanding, and so you must be managing them really well." And I said, "I don't have any problems with artists." I said, because we only take in work that's honest and speaks for itself. It speaks so well for itself, the artists don't have to speak. The artists are professional, and they know that there's experts here to do the job, to help them present their work and speak for them and speak with them. So I said, if you get an artist that shouts and screams, normally the work is not so. So that's the advice I would give, just hard work.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been so lovely to hear you talk about your practice.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, everybody. It really has been great. I've been looking forward to it so much, and I'm sorry that there's not another 5 hours, only 5 hours. Oh my God, was that only an hour? Oh, thank you.
No, it's been so lovely to hear about your practice. If you'd like to learn more about Roanne's work, then I think Carmela might be putting a link to her website into the chat below. To obviously check out more of their work, and they're also on Instagram as well, I believe. We've tagged them in a few posts, so if you follow us, you'll be able to find them really easily. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Our next artist talk is the same time next Thursday. We have artist Adam Neal, who will be talking a lot about masculinity, growing up in a working class household, and a lot of their practice is based around photography and sculpture. So if you'd like to come to that, please visit our website or Eventbrite, and you can get your free tickets to that. And thank you all so much for coming, and we hope to see you at some more future events. Thank you, bye.